Thank you for joining us today. My name is Paul Zauch, and I'm a Business Development Director for Randstad Sourceright in Asia. On behalf of our team and our client partner Ericsson, it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this webinar on how Ericsson has reshaped its employment brand in Asia during COVID-19. I've known today's speaker, Jess Bragg, for some time, so consequently I can promise you a really informative and engaging presentation. Jess is currently the Regional Recruitment Marketing Manager for Ericsson, and in her role she is responsible for developing attraction strategies across 30 countries, has been part of a global working group to develop Ericsson's new employer branding creative. She has experience in talent acquisition leadership, recruitment marketing, and employer branding, having worked across FMCG and banking prior to joining Ericsson. Jess is degree qualified with a Bachelor of Commerce majoring in Human Resource Management. She's also a recent graduate of Universum's Employer Brand Academy. Before I hand to Jess, however, I'd like to provide some context on the current employment brand landscape in Asia. Some of you will be familiar with the Randstad Employer Brand Research as a major annual report we release globally. 2020 is in fact the 20th edition of this research report. Every year when we conduct the research, we ask people what they look for when they're seeking a new employer. We also ask them who are the most attractive employers where they currently live. At the end of today's webinar, in addition to providing you the opportunity to ask Jess some questions, we'll announce the top 3 employers in the major countries in Asia as determined by this year's Randstad research. In December 2019, 185,000 people in 33 different countries were surveyed and asked those very questions I just referenced as part of the report. Before the results of the report could be released in Asia, us, along with the rest of the world, obviously went into pandemic lockdown. It seemed like everything had changed. For someone who's been a recruiter for more than 20 years, I believe that COVID-19 presents as the most transformative event the world of work has seen in more than half a century. So as a consequence, the question simply has to be asked, were the results of this year's employer brand research still relevant since the advent of the pandemic? We've reviewed the findings and we believe that, yes, some of them have in fact diminished significantly. However, some have come into much, much sharper focus as a result of COVID-19. So some of the results, just to give you some context. So what are employees in Asia looking for in a new employer? Every year when we ask this question, the results inevitably show great gaps between what people want and what employers offer, and this year was no different. This year's report shows that salary and benefits rank as the most important thing people seek in Asia, with 55% of respondents agreeing with this. 47% of respondents identified workplace flexibility as important, and 45% said job security. Every year, we see salary and benefits rank as the most important issue in almost every one of the 33 countries we survey. Most countries in Asia hold steady with this trend, however, there are some interesting local exceptions. For example, Australians always rank work-life balance as being marginally more important. Some years, New Zealanders agree with them. This year, prior to COVID-19, both Australians and New Zealanders said work-life balance was more important to them than salary and benefits. You can also see on this slide that pre-COVID-19, employers in Asia felt the key things they were able to offer job seekers in order with job security, the financial health of their organisation, and work-life balance. I remarked earlier how there is always a disparity between what people want and what employers offer. And while it's to be confirmed by next year's research, anecdotally, the recruiters at Randstad are starting to hear that this disparity is closing rapidly in Asia due to COVID-19. People now seem to be valuing some of what employers are offering more highly than they did when the pandemic first began. Organisational health and by extension relative job security are both coming into stark focus as Asia navigates troubled economic waters. Work-life balance remains very important, but its definition is broadening now to mean more of workplace flexibility. At the start of the pandemic, workplace flexibility meant simply Does your employer have the infrastructure and technology needed to move you to physical safety? As the pandemic evolves, people are telling Randstad recruiters that they now view workplace flexibility as the ongoing ability to work from home after pandemic restrictions ease. Many employees, are saying they've never been more productive than they have been at home, and they value the time and money saved from their daily commute. As a practical example, 1 in 5 Australian employees of the professional services firm EY said via an employee survey in May they would like to continue working from home after restrictions ease. Some employers in Asia have been very quick to react to this sentiment. Organisations such as Twitter and Atlassian have already notified employees there is absolutely no requirement to return to the office once COVID-19 restrictions ease. They can continue to work from home indefinitely. When you take the progressive thinking of companies like these into account, it is not surprising to hear that information technology ranks as the most attractive employment sector in Asia this year, as far as the Randstad report is concerned. The message is crystal clear. If your organisation has genuine flexible working arrangements or relative financial health that can offer some level of job security, then communicating this authentically to the talent in Asia should be a central message in your post-COVID-19 employment brand messaging. Soon, Jess will touch on how Ericsson used the authentic messaging of their organisational values to strengthen their employment brand over the last few years. There's further evidence from the employer brand research that workplace flexibility is becoming increasingly attractive to people as a result of COVID-19. With stagnant wage growth throughout Asia, Randstad wanted to understand what other non-monetary benefits were highly prized. The findings were very interesting in a pre-COVID context. They've actually become quite fascinating ever since. In Asia, the 2 most highly prized non-monetary benefits were additional leave in the form of vacation and sabbaticals and healthcare provisions. Randstad would reasonably expect that both of these will take on a further increased focus in 2021 as people use paid leave to avoid furloughs and the costs of healthcare come into starker focus for individuals. These findings on this slide were instructive in a couple of other ways. They showed how an organisation can't be one-dimensional in its employment brand or its employment offering. You need to understand that various demographics prize different benefits differently. As an example, you can see 61% of men found employee share plans attractive compared to only 51% of females. There's also a cautionary tale in this slide for organisations looking to recruit millennial talent, with 8 in 10 being drawn to flexible working hours. At some point, a benefit becomes so highly prized by a talent group that it isn't an issue of whether or not you can offer it. It's a question of how will you meet your talent acquisition needs without offering it. I think workplace flexibility in this region, when it comes to millennial talent, is a really important consideration in this regard. Understandably, many organisations diverted from employer brand investments at the start of the pandemic. Their main focus became employee welfare. As Asia starts to live with COVID-19, smart organisations are refocusing back on those previously delayed employment brand investments. History shows markets such as this are the ideal time to recruit the talent you may not have been able to acquire previously. So what should your business keep in mind when you're managing brands in an uncertain and troubled time? A recent Randstad article on this issue identified key points of focus. A copy of this will be made available to anyone interested after today's presentation. In a moment, Jess will address some of these in her presentation, but for me there were 3 that really stood out. Firstly, the importance of being authentic. I've mentioned it already. The importance of being authentic when you're delivering any new message. You have to ensure that it's connected to long-standing branding or values for consistency. Secondly, be completely transparent about the challenges you're facing. Employees seek clarity and control in difficult situations. And finally, where you can, inject some positivity. Every crisis, of course, presents challenges, but it also presents opportunity. As an example, Amazon hired 100,000 new employees globally in March 2020 and another 75,000 in April as the demand for online shopping services spiked. In our region, many furloughed aviation workers who have always been extremely well regarded for their customer service skills have found new rewarding careers in sectors such as grocery retailing and aged care. Taking these insights from the article into account, Randstad have developed an employer brand roadmap that Jess will talk to while sharing the Ericsson journey. Now, on to today's speaker. After joining Ericsson just over 12 months ago, Jess already has an impressive career in both recruitment and employer branding, having worked for ANZ Bank, Macquarie Bank, and most recently the global confectionery company Mars. Joining Ericsson before the pandemic, Jess's brief was to refresh the way Ericsson connected their employer brand to talent throughout Asia. Of course, this would have been an exceptional career experience in a normal market. In the context of COVID-19, it's been fascinating, exhilarating, and enlightening. Now my pleasure to hand over to Jess Bragg of Ericsson.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul, for that phenomenal welcome. I feel like it's something I'm not truly worthy of, but I really do want to thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with everyone today. Look, everyone, from a presentation point of view, I'm generally a little bit more relaxed. So if you do have some questions, please pop them in the conversation box. If we don't have a chance to cover them today, I do assure you that I will come back to you afterwards. But first of all, I just wanted to reflect a little bit, as Paul had mentioned, over the last 12 months in my time with Ericsson. It really was for me coming on board and sort of reevaluating the employer brand position for Ericsson. But I guess before we even sort of jump in there, I think the key message that I want to land here is just around what does employer brand mean? Because it's often a term from a talent acquisition or a recruitment or a HR perspective that we kind of know a little bit about, but don't always connect the dots around, the impact that it can have. So from an employer brand perspective, I kind of want you to reset your lexicon to think every time you hear that word employer brand, it's really about your reputation. And if I reflect on my own journey in terms of coming to Ericsson, I think one of the most amazing things that I thought of, when I thought of Ericsson was, hey, I remember Ericsson, and maybe I'm showing my age. I had an Ericsson flip phone back in the day. I remember a strong association with Sony Ericsson. But the gap that was really missing for us in Ericsson, and I hope to sort of share throughout this journey, is very much around, what is the perception right now? What is the reputation of this organisation right now? So, Werner, if you wouldn't mind just moving over to the next slide, what I thought I'd do, first of all, is just really sort of frame up Ericsson, because I'm looking at this from a few different lenses, and I'm really quite keen to share this experience. Whether you're a global organisation, where you're a multinational, a national organisation, or a small business, there's a really great story here. But at first, I just wanted to sort of frame up where Ericsson are. So to give you a bit of context, Ericsson, yes, once upon a time made flip phones. Once upon a time had a strong association with Sony Ericsson. However, Ericsson has evolved to be such a powerhouse in the ICT space. And just to give you a little bit of context in terms of what a truly global organisation we are, not only are we represented in over 180 countries, amongst our many diverse employees, there's 86% of nationalities in the world represented in our workforce, which is something that we're incredibly proud of. And to give you a little bit of context in terms of this employer branding journey and the lenses that were really applied here, specifically in our case, was not only were we trying to look at creating an employer value proposition and an employer branding creative and campaign that would very much sort of suit a global audience, we also had to think about how we could localize that for the region that I support. So thinking geographically, if you were to sort of build a map in your head, think of that geographical region from New Zealand right through to India, incorporating Southeast Asia, but excluding China. So within my remit, I'm essentially responsible, as Paul called out, over 30 countries and representing approximately about 25% of Ericsson globally. Werner, if you just wanted to move over to the next slide. Wonderful. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our vision and purpose. And again, in terms of coming through and reflecting on your own employer branding journey, it's really about thinking about that starting place. In terms of where is your organisation at this point in time? And for Ericsson, what we knew, coming into this program and this piece of work that we were also incredibly passionate to do was really about understanding, right now at this point in time, Ericsson is a leader in the ICT space. We've got this amazing legacy sitting behind us. We've been operating for over 140 years. Essentially 40% of the world's mobile traffic passed through networks that were supplied by us. But really it was about thinking, where do we want to be in the future? And I think reflecting on our employer branding journey, it was very much about thinking about the future. And, not only do we know where we potentially have some problem statements, which I'll talk through in terms of some of the whys, the whats and the hows of this exercise, but it was also for us very much about understanding about what is the organisation that we want to be in the future and where are the gaps, where do we need to attract talent, where do we need to retain talent? So very much for us, it was thinking about, this piece of work. And I do have to shout out some huge credits. So as a part of this global EVP working group, I was one of 5 working group members. However, I guess in terms of the scope of my role, I was also responsible for scoping out, the activation piece in my region. So Verna, if you wanted to just flip over really quickly, and just to give you a sense of what Ericsson looks like from a world scale, again, as you'll see sort of down towards the bottom right-hand corner, our Southeast Asia, Oceania and India space. I guess just to give you a bit of context to, where our problem statement sort of arises, seemingly well, Ericsson has, done some really great things from a commercial corporate aspect. However, on the employer brand perspective, I'm sure many of you are probably thinking, I really don't know Ericsson. I don't know what they stand for. What benefits do they offer? Why are they different? What have they done? And, those were some of the problem statements that we were facing into. In terms of our overall operating model as well, you'll see geographically here we have 5 different regions. Historically, what we had seen was each of these regions had gone ahead and developed their own iteration of an employer value proposition. They had very different employer branding campaigns. So you can imagine from an external audience perspective, if you're a candidate, perhaps you're an engineer or a solution architect, and you were thinking about making the move to Ericsson, you could be seeing content from one of these different places, all representing Ericsson, but really just didn't have any cohesiveness in terms of the creative or the messaging and what was coming through. So really, I guess, starting our journey and reflecting was really about understanding where we were, as we talked about in terms of our vision and purpose, understanding what some of the business drivers were. We wanted our leaders to come back and give us some really honest feedback. And as a part of my research in this project, I heard some really amazing things coming back from senior leaders, walking into customer meetings, trying to build that relationship and confidence, and, really being able to talk about our people very passionately was an area that they took so much pride in, and found that, their customers equally had so much more, I guess, of an appreciation of our culture once they really started to get to know us. But there was often that feedback. I think inherently Ericsson and our humble Swedish beginnings mean that we're very reluctant to share that information, to brag about our achievements or what we've offered our employees or the great things we do or the benefits, and all of the amazing things and suite of benefits that we offer. So essentially, it was really starting at that point. It was really understanding, 1, we've got disjointed messages coming out across the globe. 2, we're probably not, positioning ourselves that well from an external lens. Again, a lot of our content was very light about who we are and what we did. It was more of a case that once we'd actually onboarded and inducted new employees into our business, that's when we really started to show that level of passion and enthusiasm of who we were as an organisation. So Verna, if you wanted to flip over really quite quickly, what I've done in this slide is very, very simplistically, and I don't do this journey justice by any stretch of the imagination, but I've really mapped out sort of the key 5 stages in our employer branding journey. I do have to say I will reflect as well on the Randstad model a little bit later in my presentation. Yes, absolutely, all of those steps were also covered, but just to frame up sort of the key 5 steps that we've covered as part of this process, was one, as I mentioned, really understanding that problem statement. What is it that you're setting out on this journey to achieve? Why are you doing this? How are you going to do this? What stakeholders do you need to engender support from? From an Ericsson perspective, we were incredibly fortunate as a working group. This was a very well articulated problem that a lot of stakeholders wanted to see come through to succession with an employer brand creative and a new EVP. So we had some sensational backing on our journey. I will say, along the way, we've had to convince stakeholders about, creative directions around colour schemes and a few different pieces. But I think first and foremost, having some really clear direction and being able to scope out our intention around this project has been sensational and really has helped us yield the results that we've achieved. The next step was really understanding market research and insights. I think for anyone who's on this call who's thinking about doing their own employer branding journey, if you were thinking about how do you understand the strength of your own personal brand, you'd probably Google yourself. You'd check out what people have said about you. You'd see where you might feature from a SEO perspective in the top or the bottom of the Google search. The process from a company perspective, and especially for us at Ericsson, was as simplistic at times. We were also really fortunate as well to lean into some global talent trends that were provided by Universum. We were also to lean into some of the expertise from our partners at LinkedIn. Again, being a global project, what I was representing in terms of my market area and some of the low brand awareness that we were getting feedback from LinkedIn necessarily wasn't represented by some of my counterparts who were based in Europe. However, I think as part of this process, what's incredibly critical, and I would definitely recommend to everyone, is do your competitor analysis. If you don't know how you're stacking up against your competitors and really understanding what candidates are seeing from an outside-in perspective, it's a really enlightening journey to go through. I know for me, when I first joined Ericsson and really understanding some of the gravitas that some of our other telcos had, amazing branding, really great authentic representation. I looked at, some of our earlier pieces of content that we had, and I thought, hey, we've got equally amazing stories, if not better, but what we're not doing right now is really articulating that clearly against an EVP or with strong intention and with a vision and purpose. So moving from, taking all of this amazing market research and insights, our global working group was able to develop and draft some versions of an EVP. My strong recommendation here is really to narrow down your EVP pillars to a maximum of 3 to 5. For us, we chose, very intentionally to use 5 EVP pillars. Really, I guess, as part of that problem statement, what we were able to identify were some really critical target groups. So thinking about that long-term strategy for us and, where we want to grow and develop our business, understanding where our talent gaps was incredibly crucial. Being able to lean into data and have data-driven decisions to understand, what are those talent profiles that we don't have that we critically need or are in short supply in the market that we know that we need to aspire to look towards in the future. So this part of our project really centered on, validating our EVP, understanding our pillars and using that as a bit of a launching platform to say, hey, bringing this together, how do we want to revamp our, creative concept? A part of that employer branding journey is always being able to take, our creative to the market and build that strong association. What's that old adage, Coca-Cola that has a 99% brand recognition across, the world from a product perspective. How do we start to build the momentum was really the question we asked ourselves from an Ericsson perspective. If we want people talking about our brand, what do we want them to say? What do we want them to be excited about? We've got this really great research, which we think we know our internal talent connect to. We think that external talent connect to. We really want to bring that into a creative concept. And I have to say, throughout this process, at a few different stages, we actually ran some internal validation surveys. So when we were looking at those EVP pillars, we put a fantastic survey together to really ask people for their honest feedback. We had spoken to senior leaders, but at the same time too, we want every employee to have a voice and contribution to where we land in the future. And really some of the feedback that we got was sensational. When we look at the creative concepts, what you're probably seeing in this slide is, the traditional monochrome, which is Ericsson in a black and white, but you're also seeing bleed throughs of green, which essentially we we're able to determine after doing, a really great validation. We went out into the masses in our employees to ask them, if you were looking at a careers color, what does that look like? We really dug down deep in terms of our color palette. We really wanted to, and I love this expression by my colleague, Jasmina from Europe, was we really wanted to stretch the rubber band, in terms of people knowing the corporate identity of who we are as an organization, but also being able to have a really distinct and clear voice when it came to careers as well. So part of this process for us was not only testing and exploring and validating, it was also looking at building some guidelines. So when it came to that activation strategy, that we had a really clear direction of how we wanted our brand to look and feel. And I'm really excited, with the journey that we've been on. Our activation strategy, likewise, as I talked about in the beginning, was a bit of a blend. So both from a global and from a local perspective. I think one of the benefits of being so close to this project was, really having a strong passion and understanding for what it was, and a number of those problem statements that we were trying to address. And I think being able to reflect on some of those problem statements in, conversations when it came to, okay, we've got a new EVP, we've got an amazing new creative concept. How do we engender support to, really make sure that people are on board, that they're equally excited, was really about having a strong communication strategy, about bringing stakeholders along the way, about having a very intentional content, message and channel strategy. I cannot stress enough, doing all this amazing work is really lost in a crescendo if you don't have a really great way to execute it. For me, what was really important too was, building some awareness and conducting some training sessions with my local stakeholders as well. When you think about launching a new employer brand, it's very much about hitting the reset button, and you want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to ask questions, to really feel comfortable with the messaging before it's officially launched. And most of all, to have some really great measures in place. For Ericsson, we know that employer branding hasn't traditionally been our strength. However, we know now that, we really want to be more intentional about, where we're showing up in markets, where we're sharing messages, and when we're engaging with the community, whether we're doing volunteer work, we're doing some amazing things in our engagement with campuses, and universities. We want to be really sure that, what we're doing is obviously, done for a purpose. Obviously, we're here to try to attract, that target talent and retain our target talent. So we've got some really great metrics in place to understand, what is the impact that we're having. Then I'll just ask you to move over to the next slide really quickly, and I'll share a little bit about the final version of our EVP. I'm exceptionally proud of this, be the one who did it. I won't read it verbatim. I always tend to fumble my words. But essentially, I guess what we wanted to pull out of our EVP and our employer branding experience was something that was really genuine. As Paul mentioned earlier, there's nothing worse than looking at a prospective employer and feeling like, the content has been staged, that, that an organization is proclaiming to be one thing, but it's actually, maybe not as flashy as it's made out to be. So for us at Ericsson, we really wanted to be very genuine and authentic about what we were taking out to the market, and be the one who did is really talking to our aspiration, from an ICT perspective in telecommunications, and being a leader, to really think about that unlimited opportunity that we have to influence and impact the world through technology. Connectivity is something that we pride ourselves on. We want everyone who comes into our organisation or who is a part of our organisation to share equally in that passion and drive to, shape the future. I know there's often a perception that you think in telecommunications that everyone in telecommunications has a highly technical role. From an Ericsson perspective, for the most part, that could be true. However, we're also talking about attracting talent that may sit in functions such as marketing or HR or, traditional functions that, may not necessarily be as attractive. And surprisingly, these are also areas that we have also at times struggled to attract talent. But be the one who did is something that we're all incredibly proud of. Really quickly, Werner, I will switch over very quickly and I will shush for 60 seconds, just so I can share a bit of a preview and a video that we have pulled together. I hope everyone really enjoyed that. For us and the team that have been a part of this creative group, what was really important for us was to really be able to have an employer brand creative that really represented, I guess, all of the key messages that we wanted to share. And I think, in our earlier conception stages, we kind of thought about, how do we bring this to life? How do we give it, the Ericsson flavor that we wanted it to have? And how do we also create a message that has some flexibility in it as well? The reality is employer branding and, our employer brand is very much the is the strategic lever that will connect talent to our brand. So you'll see here, and as you would have seen in the video, we've used Be as that unifier and been able to flex the messaging. So you'll see, be yourself, be mobile, be an explorer, or be where it begins to really represent some different benefits that we'll offer our employees. Really quickly, Benno, if you wanted to move over to the next slide, I'm just conscious of time. Wonderful. From an Ericsson Careers perspective, I've called out, some of the core channels that we've chosen to incorporate in our recruitment marketing strategy now that our employer brand is now revamped. I definitely encourage you to check us out. All of our handles are Ericsson Careers. I'm exceptionally proud of the work that we've done, and there is so much more in the pipeline that we're working on to really, I guess, generate some really authentic content about who we are as a careers platform. Benno, if you just wanted to move over really quickly as well, my advice to everyone on this call as well is please, please, please don't forget about your own websites. For us at Ericsson, it definitely has been a journey about understanding, what content is attracting candidates. And I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to do a really short Google Analytics, just to understand a little bit more about, the traffic flows that come in and out of your website. I think from an Ericsson perspective, what's been really great for us to understand is, how candidates are engaging with our website, really functionally thinking about, where are we putting the apply now button? Where are we putting blogs? Where are we putting certain content? Where are we capturing the attention of our candidates? And a few different times that we've sort of altered the layout of our pages, we've had some tremendous results. So I would definitely encourage you as part of your employer branding journey to really think about that. Or, as I said, from an Ericsson perspective, we've done a lot of pilots, and I definitely recommend, trying and failing. Sometimes it can prove a point, but sometimes you can be incredibly pleasantly surprised. And then, Berno, if you wanted to switch over really quite quickly, I just wanted to reflect on this roadmap. Paul and I had been chatting about this a little while back when we kind of talked about, the Ericsson journey and where we were and sort of where we are now. And I have to say, really hand on heart, following each of these steps is something whether we consciously or unconsciously did at Ericsson. But again, sort of recapping my presentation today is really that starting point, is that understanding, first of all, the why, why are you doing this, and what is the outcome that you're hoping to achieve? But most importantly is understanding, what does your employer brand look like at the moment? What is your current story, and what are those external perceptions? The second step for us was definitely to understand, what are the leaders' expectations? Where are you hoping to take your brand in the future? Talking again about competitor analysis and looking at, whatever data is out there and available. I know I've referenced, having access to Universum data, to LinkedIn data, but if you're starting this journey, Google will be your best friend along the way. From a brand pillars and employee value proposition perspective, I would definitely encourage anyone on this call to also leverage your existing employees to give their feedback as well, and also to do some blind polling on LinkedIn is also, I found, quite useful. From an employer brand strategy and creative assets, again, come with a vision. If you get the opportunity to partner with a great marketing agency, be really clear about your intention and what you're hoping to do. From launching your employer brand internally, make sure you've got some really great stakeholders in the mix. You've taken them through the journey. They understand what you're hoping to achieve. And from activating from an external perspective, as I said, be brave, try different things. And in terms of measuring that success, really set your own goals and ensure that you have really thought about the impact that you want to make. So I hope that that's been really helpful. Paul, did you want to jump in and set me straight if I've missed anything?
No, Jess, I think that was fantastic. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Jess and I were very mindful of leaving a reasonable amount of time towards the back end of this particular webinar for questions. So Jess has very kindly agreed to take those. So if you would like to drop any into the chat function, get to as many of them as we can in the remaining time. For me, video is fantastic. Love the change maker message, and really like the green too, Jess. We haven't had a chance to discuss the green, but there was the first time I've looked at the green closely when you mentioned it today, and I think it's a really impactful colour. So if you've got a question, Jess is very comfortable to answer those, so do drop them into the chat function. But while we wait for some questions to come through,
Sure.
I did say earlier that we'd be revealing the top 3 most attractive employers in each major country in Asia, as determined by this year's Randstad Employer Brand Research. And these are those winners that were announced only recently. For those companies who might have some representation in the webinar today who are also on the slide, congratulations. You've achieved something quite significant and quite special in a really difficult time. Just some observations, I suppose, from Randstad's perspective as far as some of these winners is concerned. Firstly, really interesting to see, I think, companies who've seen their business opportunities significantly increase during the pandemic being well represented here. I talk obviously of businesses like Alibaba in China, talk obviously of Amazon and Microsoft and Wesfarmers. It'll be really fascinating to see the strength of those EVPs in 2021. Likewise, there are brands who have had their businesses substantially impacted by COVID-19 also represented. Some of those industries such as travel and aviation, for example. And really interestingly, some of these brands have been the perennial successful brands in terms of our list of most attractive employers over the journey of the Asian Randstad Employer Brand Research. So it'll be really fascinating to see how some of those organisations manage their employment brand into 2021, whilst they navigate maybe some tougher times from a business perspective, and maybe some of the things Jess had to say are good food for thought for them. Fascinating also too to see 3 public sector brands in New Zealand, the Department of Conservation, the New Zealand Customs Service, and also to New Zealand Police. Really fascinating in a country like New Zealand, I think, which has been lauded globally for its government response to COVID-19. It'll be really interesting to see next year how those brands build on what is currently a really strong position. Personally, I'd expect to see a really strong result in New Zealand next year for some of those public sector brands. The New Zealand result also shows a really interesting thing when it comes to brands as far as how they can be really significantly impacted by the way that you respond to a public event. I'm going to call out specifically New Zealand Police here. Before this year, New Zealand Police had never registered in the top 20 in our employer brand research. This year, they're in the top 3. And I think, obviously, New Zealand Police has won a lot of respect and admiration over the last 12 months in a public sense as far as its response to various tragedies are concerned in that country in 2019. And finally, as someone who's based in Australia, I was pleasantly surprised to see the nursing agency Healthcare Australia rated as our most attractive employer nationally this year. In this country, in Australia, the vocation of nursing has always had very positive standing in the community, but it's been elevated to levels never before seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I suspect next year's research will show a further positive opinion of organisations who supply frontline healthcare services in not just Australia, but other countries throughout Asia as we become very reliant on those people to help us battle the pandemic. Now, Jess, some questions have come through. So
Sure.
Let's start here, Jess. You mentioned Ericsson's taking the opportunity to look at new ways of recruiting talent into your organisation. Tell us a little bit more about that. Why is now the right time to be doing innovative things as far as talent acquisition is concerned?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for Ericsson, we're very fortunate. We're probably less impacted than other organisations when it comes to, I guess, external factors. Being a telecommunications provider, we have been at the forefront of, generating your Netflix and your streaming services and keeping everyone sane at home. So from an Ericsson perspective, I think what's been really important for us is to acknowledge that we still continuously need to bring talent into our organisation for various projects. And we've been very mindful in terms of our very deliberate strategy in going to market, in connecting with talent to make it as easy and flexible of a process, acknowledging that, right now we do have a large majority of people who are working from home, doing what we're doing, in our bedrooms, living rooms, lounge rooms, wherever, kitchen tables, trying to make that process really flexible. We were really fortunate that we had successfully launched a few pilots around using video interviewing and a few technology tools, and we've continued to sort of experiment. But for us, I think from a messaging perspective, there was a point in time, and I'd have to say it was probably around early March, and Paul, we may have even had a chat about this. We were kind of even reflecting on some of the imagery that we were putting out at that point in time, where we had people collaborating in the office and, talking to each other. And there was probably an internal question that we asked ourselves, are we being tone deaf if we show, people sort of being happy and smiling in the office? And I think we had to really reevaluate and flex that message around, being very sensitive to some people thinking that could be perceived as being tone deaf. So I think for us, it's an important time, I think, for all organisations to remember that even if you're not recruiting at the moment, now's the time to nurture your brand, because eventually we will recruit again and we will start to build our workforce, and great things will happen in every organisation. So now is the time to not just think about who we're recruiting right now, but also thinking about the future talent that we will attract in times to come.
An extension to that question, Jess, from someone who also said, thank you very much for your great and insightful presentation. As far as the employer brand rebrand is concerned, has the greatest impact related to internal talent and how they feel about things now, or has the greatest impact been external talent and how you're actually bringing them into the organisation?
It's a really great question. I would have to say at the moment, it's probably been weighted probably 60% external, 40% internal. I think some of the traditional forums, if you think about launching a new employer brand, surely in my experience, we do a big hoo-ha, we'd have messages in the office on videos, on TV screens, we might be able to do drops on people's desks, some of those things don't exist in a COVID environment. So I'd say right now, a lot of the activation we're obviously doing internal is digital. We've definitely started to reshape some of the narrative in terms of how we bring that back to life. But absolutely, I think it's probably more visible from an external lens, seeing our careers sites updated, seeing our social media sites updated.
Jess, a question here in terms of the global and local impact. Someone was keen to understand, has there been a variance in terms of global to local in regards to what you wanted to achieve, or was there a level of consistency across the board?
I think right now we've seen a really good level of consistency, and I kind of say that really cautiously. In the region that I support, being incredibly diverse, some of our markets in Southeast Asia, translation of be the one who did from English, to a Vietnamese or to a Thailand, can have a slightly different meaning. So hence why I think right now, I think there's been some really great consistency at a global level. What I'd probably anticipate in times to come as we start to hit campuses across Southeast Asia as that's starting to approach in September and October, we might have to flex the messaging a little bit as well.
Really interesting question, Jess, from the group, which is a bit of an extension of that, asking, given that you're a large global organisation, are there cultural differences that exist when it comes to developing this branding, launching this branding? And if there are, how do you navigate those? And when it comes to benefits, how do you harmonise those across different cultures and different labour categories, different labour markets?
Yeah. And look, I think it is, at times, can be the elephant in the room when it comes to having this conversation as well. Inherently, we will have countries that are bound by different legislations. I think our talking points and our core talking points when we're talking to internal audiences are very succinct in terms of what we offer all employees. I'd love to be able to, talk to the fact that even within our market area or even across our globe, we're an incredible global community. I've got colleagues based here in Australia who support, teams in Sweden or in America. That level of flexibility of being able to be hosted in other countries has been sensational. But I think coming back to that question from a benefits perspective, absolutely. I think that that's where sometimes we have to zoom in terms of certain countries and being able to talk specifically to what we might offer. I don't like to think that there is a significant variation in terms of what we offer from a benefits perspective. I think some of those core things in terms of our commitment to training and development, being very purpose-driven, what we love to offer our employees from a health and benefits perspective as well is really succinct. What you might find at local levels is, for instance, in the Philippines, you might have a rice allowance, which wouldn't exist in Australia. We might have superannuation or a pension here in Australia. So when you start to get down to those granular levels, yes, at times those benefits can vary. But I think the core offering in terms of what we want all of our employees to experience throughout their time at Ericsson is incredibly succinct.
Excellent. Next question. Great work, Jess! Exclamation mark. What was your biggest challenge across the project?
Gosh, where to start? I think alignment, and I say that with such great gratitude. My peers in my global working group are amazing, and I think having that healthy disagreement is really natural, and having different viewpoints is really natural. And I think that's the perspective that diversity gives us. Embrace that. I think at times it might feel like somebody's throwing up a roadblock, but if I'm representing my very diverse region and we're having a conversation about language or tonality, and I'm speaking to a colleague who might be representing somewhere in the Middle East, they absolutely have a valid voice as well. So I think for me was at times absolutely that, but at the same time I'd also say that was the most satisfying, was being able to come to an alignment and to get some agreement amongst the group. It sounds like a massive project, and it absolutely was, but I think also being very honest and transparent about what we're all trying to achieve. And I think every time our working group sort of hit a bit of a roadblock, we kind of came back to that point is what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? What's our end goal? How can we work together to get to that point as well?
That makes communication sound very labour intensive, Jess. Is it? Do you have to really communicate and continue to communicate and just continue to bring everyone back to the central messaging and make sure everybody's being heard, but everybody also understands the direction you're pointing in, or is there more to it than that?
No, I think it is very much about having sort of a true north of where you want to be in your end state as part of your journey. I think, people can bring their own perceptions into the mix. The great thing about having market insights and making data-driven decisions is being able to have some concrete point of difference. We can see in the data and, what it had told us, around where our brand awareness was relatively low or where we had some perceived strengths. Being able to use that data versus somebody's perception or someone's opinion or someone's thought of, another stakeholder and how they might perceive an outcome in a decision-making process. It's kind of negated when you kind of say, well, the data is the data and, this is where we are now. I did actually see one of the questions in the question box around, what were some of those measures of success? For Ericsson, I think very honestly, one of the challenges we've had is around time to hire. We're looking for exceptionally specialised skill sets in some of our market areas that are incredibly hard to find to begin with, or in a talent shortage. That's a long lead time to really activate that talent to consider Ericsson, to bring them on the journey to even apply. So sometimes our activation with our employer branding could take, quite an extensive sort of lead time before we could actually even encourage people to apply. So I can't speak for all market areas, but from my market area, we've seen in the last 6 months, at least an average 20-day reduction overall over all of our roles, which has been a significant impact to our business. And, at the end of the day, attraction is what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring great talent to join our business, to do great things, and obviously have great impact as well.
Jess, another question. Can you outline your 5 key EVP themes, or was that the be yourself, be the explorer, be the one who did, etc.? I think someone's looking for a bit of clarification there.
Right, sure. So just to clarify, Paul, was that around the EVP pillars? Perhaps that was the
question says themes, but I think given that we're 5, I think the pillars probably make sense. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, sure. So for us, I think in terms of looking at, the massive data that was coming through about, what people perceive Ericsson to be, there were really 5 standout key points for us. One, that we're associated with pioneering easy. One of our themes is quest for easy. We're always looking for the simplification of technology. Two, for us, was technology for good. Again, a little known fact about Ericsson is, the amazing volunteer network that we have in Ericsson Response. We're often the first on the ground with our volunteer network trying to rebuild communication during natural disasters. So that came through. Number three of our EVP pillars was that our employees tend to want to live for change. This concept around innovation and striving for future success. Four was Together the Brave, and really talks about our community of employees who work together that make these brave and bold choices to really progress our organisation, our industry forward. And five was this concept in the EVP pillar was around just be you. And, again, it was such a point of difference in terms of all the research and data that we saw is, our data was telling us that people just want to come to work and they want to just be them. They want to come in, they want to wear chinos with, whatever they want to wear, ironic T-shirts, Again, we're a very corporate organisation, but I think the perception there and what came through in the research was people just want to be them. They want to be their own personalities. And that's what really resonates them to wanting to be with Ericsson, is that they have the opportunity to just be themselves, which was a really powerful statement to our culture and the legacy that Ericsson had built.
Just picking up on one of those pillars, the issue around being an essential service provider and being the first on the ground to rebuild infrastructure when there's a natural disaster. I mean, also too, you've been really central as an organisation to allow people like me to continue to be able to work from home.
Yes.
In the context of COVID-19. How did you factor that particular pillar into the brand? Because it's front in mind of everybody who isn't even the sort of talent that you might seek to engage. It is introduced into the market at a very unique time, isn't it? How did you message that, and how will you continue to message that going forward?
I think and again, coming back to our Swedish background, we're always incredibly humble about, our impact in terms of communication in general. I think that particular aspect is something that we are getting better at. If we look at some of the impacts we've had in Myanmar or Vietnam and in other areas of Southeast Asia, we've had some incredible impacts there. And I think what we've started to do better is to tell those stories very authentically and the impact that we've had. But I think as part of being an essential communication provider, what's critical for us is we're attracting talents that are on the same journey as us. I think there's a perception coming to any large global organisation that you are just another number, that you are just another person who's potentially coming in to sort of work on a project. I think the investment from Ericsson and what we've been able to hopefully articulate in our new employer brand is, we want people that are going to come and join, stay with us and, help us make that impact in the future and are really just on a journey to continue their career with us.
Final question, Jess.
Sure.
And it's one that comes up a lot. How did you get the data? Did you conduct focus groups internally? Did you get representatives from different levels and different departments? Did you conduct an employer brand survey? How did you collect the insights at the start of the project that you could then start to work with? And I suppose a question for me, how did you satisfy yourself that it was the right data to have?
It's a great question. And I think as part of that process, absolutely, an internal survey was conducted. So from an internal perspective, I think over 5,000 of our employees responded, which was an incredibly healthy representation. And I think what was important there was that it wasn't a closed survey. We didn't just ask a couple of senior leaders what they thought, trying to appease them and what they wanted. Again, there was really great representation from our employee base. We absolutely leveraged into our partners at Universum to partner with us to do some market research to really take that external lens and understand what our competitors were doing, what they were doing really well, but also to give us, to hold the mirror to us essentially and tell us, hey, this is how a candidate will see you and this is your journey. And likewise, we have a strong partnership with LinkedIn from a talent acquisition perspective. We asked them the same question and got very, very honest feedback as well. So having those different pieces of feedback to triangulate a current picture gave us a lot more confidence versus just trying to make perceptions or make assumptions or, again, sort of rely on the feedback of a select few senior leaders. We wanted great representation. So whatever we were building, we knew that would represent, I guess, the majority of our population, or at least a healthy majority of our population.
Thanks, Jess. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. So thanks for making the time available, Jess, and taking us through what did turn out to be a very interesting case study, as I said it would be. Now, I also know there are other representatives of the Ericsson business on today's webinar. From all of us who are reliant on the virtual communications and telecommunications to keep working through this time, thanks to all of you for the contribution you make to the essential services that we need. Thanks also to everyone else who has attended to today's webinar, and for anyone interested, we've recorded today's session. I'm happy to make a link available to you. Also, I referenced a white paper earlier in the presentation about managing brands during a crisis. If you're interested in a copy of that, please make contact with your Randstad representative. Finally, over the next week, your Randstad representative will also make contact with you to see if you had any questions about today. And for some of you who work for large employers in your country of origin, there may in fact also be an organisation-specific Randstad employer research report available too. They will reach out and see if you'd be interested in seeing a copy of that report, which actually shows how your organisation measures up from an employment brand perspective against some of those other large employers in your market. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Jess. Everybody stay safe and well, and we look forward to connecting with you again in another Randstad webinar very, very soon. All the best, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. See you later.